Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at the chronology of the ministry of Jesus and the apostles in our continuing study of New Testament backgrounds. The ministry of Jesus begins, according to Luke chapter 3 and verse 1, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Notice they weren't using dates like we might say it's the year 2020 or something like that, but rather they would date things. One way of doing it was from the beginning of the founding of Rome, which would customarily be done within the writings of anyone from Rome. But this book isn't being written to Romans, and so instead it starts off in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, one of the emperors, the one who followed Octavius Augustus. Now the problem is we've got two different dates. In 12 AD, he began a joint rule with Octavius Augustus, who himself retired, but then after the death of Octavius, then Tiberius ruled by himself. So you would probably not pick the first date, but probably the second date, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. That would, you just do 14 plus 15, and you come to about 29 AD, which fits nicely. Now, the ministry of John the Baptist then started on the 15th year of Tiberius. You go the first year of Tiberius being 14, and like I said, you just do the math, and that brings you to 29 AD for the baptism of Jesus. This coincides also with Luke chapter 3, verse 23, that says that Jesus, notice it doesn't say he was exactly, it says he was around 30 years old. And that will fit. Remember how we said that Herod the Great died in spring of 4 BC? So if Jesus was born very early 4 BC or even 5 BC, this would still fit. Remember, there's no year zero. This would make him around 30 years old at that time. This also fits in John chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. This is where Jesus had cleansed the temple there in John chapter 2. And Jesus says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. And the Jews say to him, wait a minute, this temple took 46 years to build. By the way, it wasn't finished yet. It was still ongoing. And according to Josephus, the temple building had started in the 18th year of Herod. So again, that fits nicely with the same date. You go from 20, around 2019 BC, to again around 29 AD, and you just do the math, and that works nicely. So that puts the John chapter 2 verse 20 incident taking place around 29 AD. Now, the ministry of Jesus, and you've probably heard that it said that Jesus' ministry was around 3 years. Where we get that from is we just count the Passovers. So John chapter 2, verse 13, there's a Passover there at the cleansing of the temple. Jesus was already ministering, so his ministry had started sometime before then. How long before then? I don't want to guess. You get to John chapter 5, verse 1, there is an unnamed feast, which could be a Passover, or it could be something else. So I don't want to say definitively that it's definitely a Passover. But John chapter 6 and verse 4, there's a Passover where Jesus goes to Jerusalem. And finally, toward the end of the historical narrative section of John, after this you're going to see the Last Supper and the death, burial, and resurrection. But in John chapter 11 and verse 15, and it's mentioned again in chapter 12 verse 1 and 13 verse 1. This is the Passover where Jesus is arrested and crucified. So that's definitely 3, maybe as many as 4 Passovers. Now you just count up the Passovers, and you've got a period of 2.5, maybe 3.5 years. Could the ministry of Jesus have been slightly longer? Certainly it's possible. But it couldn't be too much shorter than that because you have a Passover every year. Now we move to the book of Acts. And the book of Acts, putting the death of Jesus, we said about 3.5 years, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. That would put it around 33 AD, which fits nicely in several areas. First of all, there was a lunar eclipse in 33 AD at Passover. And that means if that's when the crucifixion took place, that means at his crucifixion, there was not only the sun turning black, I don't know how God did that, but when you have a a lunar eclipse, the moon gets red, and maybe the moon turning to blood, which is referenced in Peter's sermon, Acts chapter 2. Maybe that had taken place in a very visual way. Maybe. I don't want to say that's definite. Well, the action then in the book of Acts takes place from roughly around 33 AD, wherever the death of Jesus is, to around the early 60s. And of course, it's written after this period because you have to write a book after the action has already taken place, but probably before 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed. And so it's probably in this period shortly thereafter. In fact, when the book of Acts ends, the Apostle Paul is waiting for his trial, but it hasn't happened yet. And so it sort of ends on a cliffhanger, waiting for the rest of the story, but which hasn't yet taken place. Now, there are 4 events that we can link in the book of Acts. We can link to actual history. First of all, in Acts chapter 12, verse 20, you have Herod Antipas, who dies very suddenly, and Josephus tells us that story. It's not quite word for word. Actually, Josephus gives us a few more details, and then Acts gives us some details that aren't in Josephus. So the 2 accounts complement each other, but we can put a date to that where he dies in 44 AD. Next, there is in 49 AD, where the Emperor Claudius issued a decree banning all Jews from Rome, and as a result of that, Aquila and Priscilla, a Jewish couple, leave Rome and they come to Corinth and they link up with Paul and they begin to do ministry with him. The third date is the year 51 AD, where Gallio, who is the proconsul, he's appointed as proconsul for a 1-year term, and we know exactly when he served, and so that connects us to Acts chapter 18. It tells us when Acts 18 is taking place. And then finally, in the year 59 AD, Festus takes office as procurator of Judea. That's in Acts 24:27. Up to that point, Paul has spent the previous 2 years in prison, so we have some good dates on that section. We take those sections now and we link them up to the book of Acts. We have Antipas dying, Herod Antipas, I'm sorry, not Antipas, Agrippa. We have the decree of Claudius. We have Gallio as proconsul, and finally Festus as procurator. And we have some fairly accurate dates for those situations in the book of Acts, and that means we can plug in the rest of the book of Acts and know when things took place. So we have a connection to the historical background of what was taking place throughout the New Testament.